All right, welcome back. We are COMP1073 in the winter 2016 semester, and it's week 10, part 1 of our broadcast. Again, we're broadcasting today instead of being live at Georgian. And what I'm going to be doing today is, and I'm not sure if you guys can hear me all right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off our broadcast with sorry about that, just switching to headset to make this a little better. Again, I'm just going to start off my broadcast by stating that I want to use Concept Board for you guys to communicate with me. So I'm going to bring up Concept Board, and again, you can join this my Concept Board for easily and free, right? I'm going to make a new board, and I'll share this with you up on. I'll kind of show it to you when it comes up in a second. But the Concept Board is, again, we've kind of done this before a couple times in different classes. What I'm going to call this board, we're going to call it COMP1073. And this board is, the actual link for the board is right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate this link up in the message, the broadcast that I put out on up on Blackboard. I'm going to put this link here. And if you want to, you can join me on this link, and we can communicate via the Concept Board. So let me just do this first. I'm going to copy this link, and we're going to go over to Blackboard. So let's see. And let's go into client-side scripting, which is the class we're in right now. And in our broadcast message, I'm just going to put in that link there so you can see it right on the top of your broadcast today. So we'll say, join me on the board. Right, questions. And then the link will be this link. Right, so we're going to go in here and paste that in there, and we'll make this link a link so you guys can see it. And there you go. So that link there is the link for our Concept Board that we're going to have. I'll submit that change. It's just used to see this up on your announcement. Okay, so if you want to go check that out, that's where you can find me. When you do join me on the link in Concept Board, again, what we can do here is you can do things like I want to put a sticky, as an example. I want to put a sticky in the middle of my note. And this is where it's going to say COMP1073. And we'll use this as a discussion board. Okay, so all you have to do is post something on here. Just go into the sticky, post something in the background, and then I'll be able to see your questions. And what I'll do is periodically check over here to see if there's anything up on Concept Board. Okay, so I'll take a break here and there, and I'll go in and take a look at this and see if you've got anything that you want to share. Okay. If you can't hear me, those kind of things, definitely put it up there. I will be also recording the class just in case the internet connection, goes down and up or whatever, and I'll be putting it up later on as the recording piece, which is going to be a companion to the broadcast. Okay. So what are we talking about today anyway? I mean, we're here on, yeah, sure, we're broadcasting remotely because of this crazy ice day, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue. We're going to be talking about jQuery. So far up to date, we've been really doing kind of vanilla JavaScript the whole way, and if we kind of have to look at jQuery as kind of one of the 4 main technologies that we use when we build web pages. So let's take a look at that. I'm just going to bring up the jQuery website for a second. Oh, I see someone's joined. Welcome, Matt. So let's bring up jQuery. So here's if I go to jQuery. jQuery, it's I would say one of the most popular APIs for the web that's out there right now. I would say probably the most popular one. A lot of stuff is based off of jQuery. jQuery is, I would say, very used, and the reason why is it's very well documented. So if I go into the API documentation, how to use this, API stands for Application Programming Interface. Think about this as all your methods and your functions that are built into the jQuery library, and it tells you what each of these methods do, right? So this is kind of really well documented API, like I said. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we use jQuery. The other one is it's free and open source. So it's not like you have to pay for anything. You go up on jQuery, you download it, and you attach it into your files. And I'll show you how to do that in a demo very shortly. And then, you know, away you go. You have access to jQuery. And jQuery, again, is just a JavaScript library. So it makes JavaScript a little bit easier as opposed to it being, you know, a little bit more strict the way we've been using it. So let's see if there's any questions so far. Margot, welcome, Margot. And there's a couple other people that I see online. Again, please post on this if you have any problems, any kind of issues. Post it up there. Again, I'll kind of be checking back here and there, so that way we can, you know, get this remote broadcast, get the most out of this remote broadcast, as opposed to, you know, making it difficult. Okay. All right. So before we start, what I want to try and do is we're gonna be basing this this discussion off of a slideshow that I've put up on Blackboard. And it's in the week 10 folder. It's going to be client-side scripting. So it's like lesson 10, jQuery Essentials. That's what you're going to find online. So you can follow that PDF document that I put up there. But what I want to do right now is kind of start off with kind of a copy of what we did last time, lesson 9. I'm going to kind of use this one as a kickoff point for what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code here. I'm just going to kind of drag and drop a version of lesson 9 in there. So first of all, I'm just going to duplicate this, and again, you can copy it the way you know how. And I'm going to just change this to lesson 10 and pull this into our Visual Studio Code. Okay, so a couple of changes I have to make, because I'm also going to share this on GitHub with you guys, is I'm going to open this in a terminal window. So let's just do that. And again, for you, it would be also it would be on command prompt. Okay, so I'm just going to clear the window. And let's try that again. Yay. I'm going to kill this this repository here. So I'm going to go rm minus rf like we've done before, which is remove everything .git. So I'm going to make a new repository for the Git for this particular project. So if I look at a couple changes I have to make, one of them is going to be my lesson. So instead of lesson 9, it's going to be lesson 10, of course. We're going to make some other changes here as well, because we're going to remove some items, because we don't want to make, it's not about Ajax today so much as around jQuery. So we're going to make some changes here later on. But for the beginning, what I want to try and do is leave everything the way it is, and then we will modify things as we go. Notice that I also have a projects.html page. Let's leave that there. We'll see how we can do things with jQuery a little differently. For those people who had problems accessing the JSON file last day, I had a little bit of a fix. We have a web config file that I've included with my Git repository from last week, and what it does is it tells Azure that how to use any kind of JSON file extensions, so that way you can access JSON files. Okay, so that's just up on Azure, or the fix for Azure. You include this web.config file. If you're doing the project from last week and trying to follow along and put it up on Azure, you may have had trouble with that. All right, so that's one thing. So I want to make that change, and also what I want to do. So I'm not going to change my content here too much, or my scripts just right now. I'm going to modify this in a second. I'm going to go back up on terminal here, and now I'm going to say git init. Right, so start off on a new repository, and I'll say git add dot, add everything in there, and then git commit -n, just like you normally do initial commit. So nothing that's different. If I can spell initial properly, how about that? The weather's frozen my brain. Okay, and then once we've done this, I'm going to go back over into. We have live stream set up in the classroom. Hey, that's cool, Matt. That's great. Let's take a look at GitHub. So we're going to go to GitHub here, and I'm going to go into Georgian. I'm going to set up a new repository just like we did last time. So I'm going to kind of go in here and go COMP1073, and in there we're just going to call this lesson 10, just so that we have a place where we can share files. Okay, there we go. And I'm just going to grab these last two lines here, and I'm going to go back up to here, and without further ado, I'll enter that in there, and then you'll have the version that I'm using right now. So every time I update the version, it'll go up on GitHub. Okay, cool. as we normally do, and again, it's something for you guys to get used to, but I always like to try and do my Azure stuff all at the same time in order for us to kind of have everything, you know, kind of working. So you guys can always go up online and see what the live site will look like, right? Okay, so I'm going to go here, plus on Azure. Again, this is just our workflow for setting up our files and our projects. I'm going to go into web and mobile. Things have changed a little bit on Azure, and they keep on updating things, and sometimes it kind of makes me mad, but it is what it is, right? So we're going to make it so it's, again, COMP1073. We're going to call this the winter 2016 semester, and it'll be lesson 10. There we go. And then this is where it's different, eh? It asks you for a new resource and pay as you go and all that. I'm just going to, you know, kind of look at one of the resources that's close by. So East US, right? That's kind of closer to where we are. And this is the app service plan location. It kind of gives us this, you know, these weird things. I'm just going to go with this East US app service plan. Don't worry about this so much. I mean, it's still going to be free for you guys for using DreamSpark. I'm going to click create here. So to create my repository, my space, this is again my web space that I'm making online on Azure. So that way I have a place to hold my files again. And you can see that I have several other little web apps running. And I keep on deleting them. I'll make one for lesson 7 or lesson 8, and then I'll kill that one after a couple weeks. And the reason for that is I just don't want to clutter my space, not because I'm worried about going overboard or whatever. And remember, I have pay as you go. I don't get free like you guys do, but you know, but the amount of money that I pay is maybe $5 a month with everything that I do. So it's okay, it's worth it. Okay, so if I go back down to my deployment source, this used to be continuous deployment. Now this changed to deployment source. This is one of the changes that came in. So I'm going to click on deployment source, and notice that it says configure required settings. I want to click on GitHub, of course, and then I want to choose my one of my GitHub accounts. I'm going to, of course, choose Georgian. And then from there, I'm going to configure my settings and choose COMP1073 lesson 10, which is I've just deployed. Notice there's also a new piece, performance test. Please don't click this. This just gives you more information from a deployment perspective. You don't need to click this. Just press OK. Once you do this, it'll set up your continuous deployment. It'll connect with GitHub, and it'll deploy the files right from GitHub right onto Microsoft Azure. So it'll be running, you know, pretty quick. Now, I've got some pretty good download speeds at home. I'm running with about 100 down and 10 up, so you should see things flying pretty good when it comes to you know, the broadcast that we're doing. You should see fairly decent rates. Now, last time we had all kinds of power outages, but today it looks like everything's back online. So we'll see things. Hopefully, we'll have a pretty clean broadcast, minus, of course, any conversation that's going to happen with my little boy who's home as well, going, "Daddy, I want to play video games." Okay, but that will hopefully not interrupt us too much. Okay, so it looks like we're live. It looks like here we go. GitHub is live. And to check that again, I'm just going to click on this link, which is going to take us here. And if everything goes well, then we should be able to see last week's project, just named lesson 10. Okay, so nothing different here that we haven't seen before. All right, so this is the kind of stuff that we were doing last week, and it's working now here on Visual Studio. Azure. Okay, cool. Okay, so prep is done. Let's take a look at concept board here. Looks like some people are drawing. This is good. I like the drawings. Again, let's use this thing from a communication perspective. It's a great place to pop a little sticky note if you have a question. But we're going to get right into jQuery and how to configure that. Okay, so going back to our project here, and let's take a look at what we have. This is the project we've been using so far. Notice that we already have Bootstrap. That's the Bootstrap form we've been using for our navbar. The navbar here that we see here is just kind of a template that we've used from Bootstrap to get this thing going. And the only thing, I have 2 links here. I have my projects link. Actually, there's 3. There's my home page, my projects link, and my contact page. Of course, my contact page doesn't work because I don't have a contact page here. What we have further down is some other stuff that I've included for sections and rows inside of our page. So let's clean some of this up because we don't need any of this. I'm just going to kill this whole section here. So this is from line 51 of my code to line 73, just to clean it up. And it's all done, right? There we go. And I'll save that. And in my scripts, notice that I connected 2 scripts. One is app.js, which is the main one that I'm going to be using today. And I have this XHR request, and what we were doing last day is talking about Ajax and how to connect Ajax to our people.txt file. Let's leave our people.txt file there, because hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be able to use jQuery to connect to people.txt as well. Because jQuery has some really cool shortcuts that we can use for Ajax and JSON. We'll look at those things once we understand what jQuery is. But for now, what I want to try and do is get rid of all this stuff. Just the IFI, I want to leave the IFI in place. Let's get rid of all this so that we don't have any errors. I'll just get rid of all that. And we'll leave the other piece, the other projects.js file alone, because that also, if I click on projects.js, it has another copy of our stuff. So we can always go back here and change this or use this as a template if you want to use something, want to do something with jQuery with app.js. Okay, cool. So here's our jQuery. Our app.js file is going to be free. Okay, so one thing to note is when you hook up you want to hook jQuery into your files, we've kind of already done that. We did it from day one. I mean, I kind of did it silently. I would say probably the first day we installed Bootstrap. jQuery 2.2.0 was the version of jQuery that we included with our files. And we downloaded it and put them into a scripts lib folder, right? Here's our scripts lib. And notice that we have version 2.2.0 in here with Bootstrap. Okay, so if I was going to go back online though, so let's go back online and let's take a look at, go back to jQuery, right? So if I was to look at jQuery for a second, so let's go to jQuery.com. It looks like we're at a version of 2.2.2. So, I mean, jQuery fairly updates on a regular basis. And this can be good and bad. Sometimes, some open source libraries, unlike jQuery, what they do is they update, but then there's breaking changes that stop things from working from previous versions. Not so much with jQuery. jQuery is pretty consistent. All they do is a lot of bug fixes. They add a few features slowly. So they're not progressing as quickly as some other libraries out there, which is a good thing. It means there's a slow iteration, a progression in how things are improved, but not something that's going to break your code if you've used it last week. So let's leave it alone. Let's leave our version of jQuery the way it is. There's not going to be many changes from 2.2.2 to 2.2.0, the one we're using right now. All right, so this is going to be fine. Okay, so really you're set up for jQuery right now. Now the thing, when we use jQuery, if I go back to my app.js file, if I want to use jQuery, typically what I want to do is put the $sign in. $sign means jQuery when we start using it. And if I start typing stuff in for jQuery, it starts off looking like this. So let's leave this alone like this. We're going to kind of leave this as a placeholder for now. And let's go back to that PowerPoint presentation and talk about what jQuery is. All right. So what is jQuery, right? Really, again, like I said, it's this open source library that it's been written a while ago. Now here in this PowerPoint presentation, it says it's one of the 10,000 most visited websites today. This PowerPoint was written a couple of years ago, right, with jQuery, and nothing much has changed in terms of functionality. But jQuery is still one of the most popular libraries out there. And again, this author, when we were talking about this PowerPoint, they basically consider jQuery the fourth technology, along with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? I kind of agree and disagree. Some people would say that vanilla JavaScript these days has become really powerful and really popular these days. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with modern JavaScript that you couldn't do before without jQuery. So things have changed a little bit in terms of JavaScript functionality, right? So jQuery has really built on top of JavaScript, so that's kind of cool. And jQuery, like I said to you before, makes JavaScript a little bit easier in terms of functionality. It kind of makes it so that when it comes to filtering and selecting and manipulating the DOM and all that kind of stuff, it becomes a little bit easier. Let's take a look at the chart. So here's some 8 categories that really jQuery is really great at. So it has things like our core functionality. So things like functions, basic functions, things like event handling. They do that really well from an event perspective. Things with styling and CSS, all kinds of other stuff. Ajax, for me, jQuery is the reason why we use jQuery more than anything else for Ajax, because it makes Ajax calls cross-platform a lot easier than doing it by hand with JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript. They also have a user interface piece. You can also download jQuery UI if you wanted to have advanced user interface effects and so on that are built. And they have some templating for things like accordion, tabs, those kind of things to add a bit of flair to your website. Now, some of this stuff, I'll be honest, is a little dated right from jQuery. I'm not sure that I would use all the pieces for jQuery UI. And if you're wondering where to get jQuery UI, we're going to kind of do that today as well. If I take a look at jQuery, right over here, notice on the top, there's a few different tabs, right? So these are kind of some of the projects that jQuery is working with. You need jQuery as a basis first. So jQuery would be the first one that you need. Then if you want to use jQuery UI, it gives you additional functionality. So it's almost like an add-on on top of jQuery, right? So things like accordion, autocomplete, some other things, the date picker app, a dialog box, a progress bar, all these things that you want to add in. Some really cool tools that you can add into your website to make it more interactive. You can use jQuery UI. We're going to add this in later on, like I said. So for now, let's just talk about pure jQuery. Other things that it has also, this is kind of an older library, but still being updated today, which I really like, to me, is jQuery Mobile, right? So if you want to make a mobile app, you can certainly use jQuery Mobile. Again, it depends on jQuery, so you have to have jQuery first, and then you add jQuery Mobile after. And for a long time, jQuery Mobile was like the de facto standard for creating interfaces. And then what you do is you use something like a PhoneGap. PhoneGap is a middleware that converts HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into what looks like a native app on iPhone and Android, right? So that's really cool. And so again, it's based off of jQuery. Some really cool things. And there's other ones. I'm not going to talk too much about the other ones too much, but those are the three that are really, really popular and important. So just to talk about these three right here. So today we're going to focus on jQuery. If we have time, we'll get into jQuery UI and maybe with a little bit of jQuery Mobile if we have time to kind of do that. If not, we'll carry this conversation over to next week. And then what I'm hoping is by tonight, you'll have another project, another little assignment that has to do with jQuery. I'll put it up on Blackboard, and it'll be something that's fairly straightforward that just gets you to practice jQuery a little bit. Okay. Any questions so far? Let's go back to concept board to kind of look at that. So we have, I'll kind of zoom in here to the discussion. I don't want that. But again, if you want to, you can come online and just, drop a little card here that tells me if you have any questions. If not, it's totally cool. I don't see any questions up here right now, so I'm going to come back to this. Okay. Let's get moving with this stuff here. So that's what jQuery is. So jQuery, again, is a library based off of JavaScript. It's a JavaScript library that gives additional functionality. So someone, a group of people in the community have written, additional popular functions that are constantly were needed at the time for JavaScript. They were almost kind of missing. The missing part of JavaScript is what we were thinking about calling it back in the day, right? So they talk about the jQuery download coming in two versions here, the minified version, which is compressed, and then the other version, which is uncompressed. It doesn't matter to me. I typically use the minified version. Notice that if I go back to my code, so if I want to go back to my index.html, remember, think about your index.html here. Whenever you make anything with JavaScript or any kind of scripting at all, think about your index.html or your main HTML pages as your manifest for your application. So we're not just making web pages, web design here. We're making full web apps. And when we make a web app, we have to use these things. We still have to link our libraries in order, the right order, by the way, into our application. So notice that jQuery comes first, and then we add Bootstrap. So we can't run Bootstrap without jQuery. Bootstrap is another free library that we can use that adds CSS styling to our page, and we've been using it throughout, right? Then finally, our app.js comes at the bottom. So this, our custom code comes down here. And so there's two sections, one for libraries and kind of one for our code. So let's break that out. So just to, indicate that a little differently today than other days. So I'm going to say something like, this is our custom code. So this is really our JavaScript or application JavaScript. So app JavaScript, right? This is what this is. And this really is our JavaScript libraries section. That's what this is. These are our JavaScript libraries. This is our app JavaScript, the one our custom JavaScript kind of lives in here. We broke this out. We're going to add more to this over time. So this is the first application programming interface we're looking at, jQuery. And again, it's one of the most popular ones, and it makes JavaScript a little easier. Okay. So they're talking here about other ways to add things in. There's something called a CDN, a Content Delivery Network. And that's another way to add jQuery to your files. And what is a content delivery network? Well, think about this as it's a bunch of servers. So instead of like one server serving out the files to everybody, right, you have a bunch of servers serving out the same files to everybody. Well, this is a little bit better model, right, from a production perspective. If I was going to do development, I'd probably do something like this, right, if I'm developing locally. Test my files and so on, right? I want to make sure that if I want to test on a bus, or if I want to test on a plane, or if I want to, I don't even need the internet to do all my testing if I do it this way. Here, though, when it comes to production, this is a more efficient way of doing things. And the reason why it's more efficient is because these servers all serve up the same version of your code. And you can specify which version of jQuery or JavaScript even that you want to serve up to your computers. And the good thing is when the computers, so let's say here's a browser, it accesses this server, and it gets the latest files, right? The latest jQuery files. Once it has that version of jQuery, if I access this server or this server or this server or different websites, and they have the same version of jQuery, I don't have to update mine, which means pages will load faster, right? Whereas here, every single time a user comes over and accesses my files that are locally served, they're going to have to download the jQuery library, which isn't that big, but still takes a little bit more time to download, which makes our page loading slower, right? So actually, for a long time, there's paranoia around, having your local files here on your site and, serving things up. But like I said before, unless Google is down somehow, right, or Microsoft or some big, company like that, if one of them is down, probably the internet's down, right? And if the internet's down, well, then there's some kind of national catastrophe, because usually the internet doesn't go down. So whereas before it wasn't as pervasive, now today it's pervasive, and this is a safe scenario as well. Just like web fonts as a good example, right? For long years, and if I was to look at Google Fonts for a second, just to kind of illustrate this point. So here's Google Fonts. For long years, web fonts was, considered, well, it's kind of slow, right? We don't know if these web fonts are available to us, but a lot of times we use web fonts these days because they offer a great selection of fonts that are online that we can use, and it's totally safe. It's not like we're going to worry about, the web fonts, Google Fonts not being available. I've never seen that happen, right? Sometimes it's a little slow, right, to load up, and that's definitely a factor where you may decide not to use web fonts. But web fonts is like using a CDN again. You don't have to make it so it's local. We use the content delivery network to serve up the web fonts. Same thing with any other JavaScript library, whether it's even Font Awesome, right? So if I was going to look at Font Awesome, and if I want to find the CDN for a particular library, I would go Font Awesome CDN. If I was going to find that, you can see that there's going to be probably a link for Font Awesome somewhere, where it's going to show me where to get the CDN, right? So right on the page here, it tells me, here's my link to the CDN for Font Awesome. So instead of linking locally, right? So if I go back to my files, and if I go to my index.html, and if I look at the top, notice how Font Awesome is linked locally. I have Font Awesome files here. I can do the same thing for Font Awesome and Bootstrap, right? So everything, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, and jQuery can all be linked through a content delivery network. So I never actually have files physically sitting here on my server. But again, that is from a production perspective. If in that scenario, I would recommend doing that. In this scenario, sometimes it's better for us to test locally because this way it's a little bit quicker, and we have more control over how we're testing our files and the versions that we're using. Okay, it's just FYI. So that's what a content delivery is really for. We've talked about it a couple times, but I don't know if I spelled it out just quite this way. So here on the PowerPoint, it tells us some old links. Notice that the version of jQuery they're talking about here is 1.9.0. That was the latest version as of this printing, which is, again, a couple of years ago. Don't worry about the CDN or that version. You can get the latest version up online. Okay, so again, so think about a plugin. We want a plugin is what jQuery is. jQuery is like a plugin, right, or a library that helps us extend the natural way JavaScript works. So we have more additional features, right? jQuery UI is another plugin, like I said, on top of jQuery that builds on the different libraries that jQuery already has. Okay. So what is jQuery and how do you use it, right? One of the best things that we use, best reasons why we use jQuery is the ability for it to filter out or select, different elements of our pages, very similarly to the way we use CSS. So if we know how to use CSS, then we almost automatically know how to use jQuery selectors. Okay, that's one thing to note. So notice that we can filter by different things, by tag name, by identifier, by class name. And notice this is the exact same way here that we would filter if we were using a selector for CSS, right? This is the same stuff. So if you look at a code example, notice that we have the $, that means jQuery. That's what this $, means. And then the selector, right? So for example, if I wanted to target a selector that's on my page, if I go back to here, and here's our, H1 tag, right? As an example. And let's say this is our, our kind of, under main content, right? Under main content, I'm looking at my H1 tag. So how would I make that selector happen if I was going to do CSS? Well, I probably would do something like this: pound main content, if it was going to be like that, and then space H1 for the H1 selector. So I want to affect the H1 selector here under main content. So how would I target that in jQuery? Well, I would do something like this. So it's the exact thing that I'm talking about here. So it's a pound, and again, main content, if this is how I spelled it, right, space H1, right? So same thing that we normally would do for our selector. And then from there, we can kind of specify what other things we want to do. Notice that we're not really getting a lot of code hinting here at all, right? There's no code hinting for jQuery. It's not like it'll bring up what I can do with this content. And this is a problem, right? One of the biggest problems with using a library like jQuery is we don't have a lot of code hinting. Well, there's some help for us. There is some help for us. And I'd like you to refer you back to something new that's been kind of circulating over the last couple years called TypeScript. If you go to typescriptlang.org, we're going to go more into TypeScript later on about what it is. But really what it is it's kind of a superset of JavaScript. That's what it is. And again, you don't have to use TypeScript for today, but we're going to be talking about it later on as we move forward. But what TypeScript does is it helps us build enterprise level applications a little easier, and it brings class structure, the class, classical inheritance and so on, to JavaScript, which is kind of cool. We're not going to use it for that. All I want to use our TypeScript library for today is for code hinting. And one of the things that TypeScript has is type definition libraries that allow us to, kind of use existing libraries and get code hinting, like IntelliSense, inside of our code, right? So if you notice here, no IntelliSense. If I press, period, and I want to get some code hinting, control space, there's no suggestions, right? That's kind of, really not useful for us. I want to be able to do stuff with jQuery, but I have no clue how to do it, right? If I've never used jQuery before, I could get stuck here. I'd have to look online, look through the API, and so on. Of course, any kind of code hinting is much better than this. Okay, how do I do that? What's the quick way to do it? Well, if I look up online, there's another service we can use. If I look at TSD, and if you look up TSD on Google, you can go to something called Definitely Typed. Definitely Typed is a short little library that we can add in. And all I need to do for Definitely Typed is type in, again, you need Node installed on your system to do this. And just like we've been using Node when I do my HTTP server, like locally, if I do HTTP-server, remember to serve up my files. I used to do that with Node. In order for you to install HTTP server, you need Node. And my version of Node is 5.40, right? So you need Node to install. And for those people who don't remember that or how to install that, if you go to Node.js, you have to download Node.js first, and look how it's progressed. 5.9.1, wow, it's really changed over the last little while. So download the latest version of Node, install this into your system, and once you've done that, you have access to do something like this with npm. And you have to enable this on the command line, right, in order for you to do this, right? So let's take a look and see how this looks. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to kind of do the npm install. So I'll say npm install tsd -g, right? And what this is going to do is take the latest version of type definition library, take a look, and install it globally in my system. And this is what it would look like, right? It's going to kind of go through this and do its little dance. When it's done, what I can do is I can use TSD to install the latest, some of the latest, what we call typings. This is what it's going to look like when it's done for the web. So let's say, for example, I want support in my COMP1073 lesson 10. I want support for jQuery. Then all I have to do is do something like this. And I'm just going to go back to, I'm going to minimize this for a second just to make it a little bit more clear. So here I have no code hinting, but I want to get code hinting. That's all I want for jQuery. I don't want to use TypeScript to change the language right now. I just want code hinting, and this is a great tool for that. So I'm going to say TSD install, and I'll put in jQuery. What I also want to do when I do TSD install jQuery is -- save. And what this command does is it says, hey, TSD, type definition libraries, install some code hinting for jQuery, and then save that, the fact that I'm using this jQuery stuff inside of a TSD config file here in my project. Okay, so I'm going to press enter, and what it's going to do is going to go up to the web, right? Find a type definition for jQuery, right? And install it. Notice how it says jQuery running install written one file, and I get jQuery jQuery.d.ts. Cool. Notice here that what it's done is it's installed the typings folder. Here's my typings folder. And inside my typings folder, I have this tsd.d.ts file that's sitting right in here, right? Which is actually a reference file to the jQuery library. And what this does, this little library that I just got, jQuery.d.ts, it gives you definitions for how jQuery works. You don't have to look through this file. I'm just showing you where it's all at so you know where I'm getting this from. Okay, cool. Let's go back to this. So let's just save this file for a second. Let's kill this for a second. Save the file. And what I want to do is sometimes what you need to do with jQuery is come out of the file you're working in and come back into it so that the changes take effect. So let's just do that. So let's go back into scripts, app.js, and then start typing jQuery. So if you want to make sure that jQuery works, type $. When I press the dot, if I press Control space, oh, look at this. I get a bunch of different things I can add into my jQuery, right? And if I look at the selector that I put before, something like main content, right, and the H1 selector, and then if I press dot and space, oh man, I got no code hinting. I still got no code hinting for jQuery. Well, that's because one more step that you need to do is you need to point to this type definition library, this tsd.d.ts file that's sitting inside typings in order for me to get code hinting. And I want to do that here at the top of my file, right? So I'm going to kind of go up here. And it takes the syntax. So you can use this when I put it up on GitHub. So I'm going to go // It's kind of a different thing. So instead of // for comments, // creates this reference. And I'm going to say something like this: reference path, right? That's interesting that I did that. Reference path, right, is equal to, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to the reference path. So I'm inside app.js, right? Which is inside script. So I have to go up one and then down one to go into typings, and then tsd.d.ts. So the path is up one, down into typings, and then I'll go to tsd.d.ts and then close off that reference. Okay. Save that. That's all this does for my typings. And again, I'm going to go close this off and go back into app.js, right? So here's my app.js again. Open this one up. And now let's try this again. So the $, you get a different thing. All of a sudden it looks like I got jQuery here, right? Notice that this is different than what I got last time. I got a different list before, right? So now I'm going to start typing the same thing. So if you notice, as I type, it gives me some code hinting. It says selector, string, element, and so on. This is a great help. It's a huge thing that we have access to nowadays compared to what it was before in the old days when we used jQuery. So again, I'm going to look at the selector, which is main content. Here's my filter that I'm putting into it, H1. So I'm looking at the H1 code. And now if I press dot, I get a bunch of options here of what I can do, right? So what do I want to do when this is the target? So I'm saying, let's target what I'm looking at, my H1 selector, right? If I just put this alone and I declare a variable, let's say I want to get a reference to an object, like for example, var, my main content H1, let's call it something like that, main content H1 is equal to this, right? Actually, what this is like saying document.getElementById, get the element, the H1 tag that's inside this document, right? Now, what am I getting? Am I getting the actual selector itself? And just to show you what I'm getting, let's do a console log, right, to see what I'm getting. So console.log, and then put in main content 1, right? So we can see what we're getting here when we get a reference to this. Notice when I hover over, I also get a reference to what this is. It says main content H1 is jQuery. I wonder if that's right. That I'm getting this piece here, right? So I'm getting a reference to jQuery, whatever that is, right? Okay, let's check it out when I run the file now. So I'm gonna go back to my index.html, and there's nothing in here. All I'm doing is I'm trying to get a reference to my H1 tag. How do I do that? And let's run this thing. So I'm gonna go here, and instead of running HTTP server, I'm just gonna double click on my files. So here on my lesson 10, just for now, because I don't have anything that I care to, to view online, I'm just gonna double click on index.html and see what I get. I get this, right? And if I right click and go inspect, in my console, I get this, n.fn.init. And if I click in here, I can see that I get my 0 is H1. I get a context, which is document. So I'm actually getting a reference to my document. I'm getting a filter. That's what this is, a filter, which is the H1 tag, right? And it tells me what my base URI is, and so on, right? So this is kind of the way I'm filtering. So this is the first thing I want you to look at. Take a look at something else. My inner HTML, right, I have access to it, and the inner text version I have access to as well, right? So again, this is something that I wanted you to look at so that you can see what I have access to, this whole object that I normally get. Right? To compare this thing that I'm getting here with my document.getElementById, right? Let's go back to, remember I've targeted a little bit more. This selector is a little bit more comprehensive than what I normally do with our document.getElementById. Let's just go back there for a second and check that out. So if I go back to my app.js, here's my app.js. And if I was to do the same thing, so this is, we'll call this the jQuery one, right? Let's do the same kind of idea. And I'll say main content H1, and we'll just use JavaScript, so we'll say JS, right? So this is the JS version, and I would normally use something like this: document, right? Dot query selector, right? So this is the way we do it in JavaScript: query selector, and then what you can do is, here's my selector. It's a string of selectors. So I'm going to say main content H1. Okay, that's what this is. So. And if I was to print that out, so let's just not do this one for now, right? This main content one. And I'll do the same thing, console.log. And I'll say main content JS to show you the difference when we do this. And I'll save everything, and then I'll run this back inside our page, refresh. Notice that we get welcome to lesson 10 H1. That's a different thing for our right away. That's where we get right in our, we actually get the value, the tag, and everything that's related to it. So it's not quite the same when we use the jQuery and this other way of doing things. So I'm actually getting the whole thing, H1, the H1 tag itself, that's inside of our main content. Let's take a look at that again. So what I'm targeting here is our main content H1, but I'm actually not just getting this. I'm getting back when it returns. Notice that it says I'm getting back an element. So that's what I want here, and jQuery does it slightly different. We'll come back to this in a second, but keep in mind what I'm doing here. What the difference is: one, I'm getting back an object with a lot of different things. Here, I'm getting a specific the H1 tag is what it's returning. The H1 tag and all the content therein, the node, the H1 node, plus its text, the content that's inside of that node, which is the text content, right? I'm getting that back when I do this. All right, so a couple of different things here. We'll go back to this in a second. All right, but notice that jQuery allows us to really target not just the node, but also the whole document. If I wanted to look at the text, if I do something like this, if I start typing text, right? And it tells me what it is. It's get the combined text contents of each element in the set of matched elements, right? So that's one thing it does. If I go to inner, right? Inner height, inner width, wrap inner. That doesn't really tell me what to do. How about value? I can also get value, which is get current value of the first element in the set of matched elements. Okay, so let's look at val, right? So if I say val, can I open it up, or is it a the value like this is it a property that I'm getting back, or is it a method, right? And notice the difference here. It tells us that it's listing for a method call or some kind of function call. And there's two overloads here. There's other things we can do. So let's look at val like this and see what we're getting now. So let's move this back into play. I'll do both. Oops, I had to do it the other way. Let's do both. So I'm going to do first match content, this one, and then this one, the way it's done here. This is the value of what I'm getting of my selector. And this is I'm using query selector, which is the JavaScript way of getting the value of what's inside main content H1. That's how I'm targeting. Normally this is how we would target styling for CSS, right? Same way. So I'll save everything and go back to here and refresh it. And then let's see what we get. In the console, we get nothing, right? app.js on line 12, we get nothing back. And we still get our content here. So there's no value. That's interesting. Let's go back here and change this to text. See what we get now. So we're going to say text. And this is also a method. So I'm going to kind of put the text method, right? So let's see what that returns. Okay, so again, I'll refresh. And I get welcome to lesson 10. That's interesting. So this one gives us welcome to lesson 10. The other one gives us an H1 tag, right? That gives us everything in. So that's interesting. So this second one gave us the H1 tag this time around when we did this, right? So the first one gives us the actual the text inside our H1 tag, right? And the second one actually returned the H1 tag itself, which is kind of different than what we got last time. Let me show you that again. So let's say if I uncomment this one, so we don't care what we're getting back from jQuery for a second. And now all I'm looking at is from my main content h1.js. So I'll go back here and refresh. Notice that I just get this back. But when I do this one, if I put both back, let's say I comment this one out, put this one back in. So this is our main content that I'm getting back from jQuery. And refresh, I just get welcome to lesson 10. The string that comes back is the content that's inside my H1 tag, right? Not the H1 tag itself. All right, so I want to get my tag back. I want to get the actual tag back, and everything is just like this. How do I do that? We'll figure this out in a second. So the first piece to understand with jQuery is we use this syntax to target a selector. Once we've targeted a selector, and again, we're using the same CSS syntax we're used to. That's why it's so easy to understand and to learn jQuery. The learning curve is really quick, right? It's really, kind of low. We can do things like this. We can say things, well, let's target all paragraph elements. That's how we target stuff. Or all IDs, right? All elements with facts as an ID, right? Or let's target it by class. All elements that have the plus class. And of course, it's going to return an array of elements, right? Because if I say all, once I say all anything, right, I get a return an array of elements. That's what I'm actually doing here. An array of elements. That's interesting. Well, that means that if I do something like this, and this is an array of elements, I should be able to do something like this then, right? 0, right? Because I'm looking at the first element of the array, right? Because remember, we do array, it's zero-based counting, and if I'm getting an array back of elements, even though in this particular case there's only a one H1 tag inside of my index.html, which is inside of a something that's been tagged with main content, I only have one H1 tag, right? But really, what it's returning is an array of H1 tags. I could have had a bunch of them. So let's say I have this one, and let's say I have another one, right? Another H1 tag that says, here's another one. Right, here's another H1. If I do this, and when I go back to my code for a second, so here's my app.js, and I go back to my code, you can see that, right, when I do this by itself without this piece, I'm going to get not just the first H1 tag, but an array of elements back, right? So let's just try this out and see what I get. So I'm going to go to back to my web page and refresh, and hey, I get this H1 tag thing again, right? All right, cool. And that's just by doing this. But what if I change this to 1? Okay. I refresh, and I get my H1 tag, right? That's interesting. I get my H1 tag, and I get, depends on when I refresh. Here's another one is what it really says, right? This is what I'm getting back in my thing. So notice I got the second H1 tag. Here's my first H1 tag, but this one targets my second one. Why? Because this is an array. When I do this query selector here, right? I'm not query selecting all, right? And the analog to this in JavaScript is query selector all. So let's put that back in here. And notice there's query selector all, right? Query selector all actually does the same thing. It takes all of the H1 elements that match, that are inside anything that has a main content, a tag with a main content, and puts it inside this this element. Notice what I get back. It says node list of elements, a list, which is an array of elements, right? So if I was to go back and let's comment out the jQuery, and let's just look at the regular JavaScript now, right? And we're just using query selector all to see the difference, right? So first of all, this is an array of elements. Let's see what I get back with jQuery, JavaScript. So go back, refresh, and I get two H1s, right? Because I get an array back of elements. I get my first element, which is, and the inner text of the element. If I go to all the way down, right, to the text, I can see that the text content is welcome to lesson 10, right? That's what it does. That's what it looks like, right? And that's for my first one. And my second one, which is so array element 0, array element 1. If I go back down and look at this, I can see that I see the second one, which should say another. Here's another H1, which is this one, right? So I can do the same thing kind of with JavaScript as I do with jQuery. But notice that what I'm getting back is elements, an array of elements right here. Well, if that's true, then I should be able to do the same kind of idea with JavaScript. So I should be doing something like this. If I want the first element back in my array, if I press save, and if I hover over this now, it says I get an element, right? This is the element I'm getting back, right? So I'm getting the first element back now, okay? That's what this is doing. Okay, cool. So let's take a look and see what I'm getting back if I refresh. Another one. See, it's the first element. I'm getting back this one, right? And if I do the same thing with my main content H1, which is just jQuery, look how small jQuery is. Look how much bigger JavaScript is. Hey, I'm not saying that this is more difficult. I'm just saying that this is longer, right? So think about jQuery in some ways as a shorthand for JavaScript, right? Let's refresh. I get both the same. I get here's my H1 tag and here's my H1 tag. If I refresh again, sometimes you get like both those elements back, depending on how you refresh, which is kind of weird here and thing. But notice that it's the exact same element that I'm getting back. They're the exact same response. This just looks like an HTML element, and this looks like an HTML element. They're the exact same way of doing things, right? Well, different ways of doing things, but getting the same content back. Some people will prefer document.querySelectorAll because I don't have to use a big library like jQuery, and jQuery is quite a big library that adds into my my files. So you know it's a little bit more compact to use this, right? So from a lean development perspective, you know what, JavaScript is pretty darn good, right? But jQuery is again the de facto standard for shortcuts when it comes to JavaScript. So don't discount jQuery yet. And besides, it has lots of other functionality that takes a lot more lines to write here and longer for JavaScript, and sometimes more confusing. Okay, so we'll see how this works. So this is kind of interesting. So this first piece is the selector, and this second piece targets, you know, the first element that it gets back. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. Then I'll kind of go to the concept board for questions. So again, so this is the way we target our selectors, and I should be pretty clear on that stuff. And notice it's the same thing with our descendants, the same way we would target descendants in CSS. So for example, all P elements, all paragraph elements inside an object or some kind of tag that's tagged with a fax ID, right? Here's interesting, adjacent elements, both the H2 tags, right? So all div elements, all div elements that are adjacent to H2 tags. That's what this is. All div elements that are adjacent to H2 tags. So they're siblings, brother, sister, so to speak, right? Here's one. All paragraph elements, right, that are siblings of, right, that are siblings of UL elements, right? So paragraphs that are siblings, so on the same level as UL elements. All UL elements that are contained inside div elements. right, that are children or contained inside div elements. And so these, you notice these are the same kind of descendant selectors that we would normally be seeing in CSS. So if you know CSS, then jQuery is your friend. If you don't know CSS so well, then jQuery might seem a little bit confusing to you. But then again, so would CSS, right? Okay, so we'll talk about, let's stop there for a second from a a targeting perspective. And let's go back to concept board. Maybe you guys have some questions that I can answer. So I'm going to go over to concept board. And it looks like, any questions, guys, so far? I mean, again, jQuery, all I want to say again is that jQuery is a shortcut right now that we can use for JavaScript. The great thing is, you might say, well, Tom, you mentioned that jQuery is a little fatter than JavaScript. Yeah, it is. It's a little fatter, but we're using Bootstrap. So if I'm using Bootstrap, right? Let's go back to this. Notice there's no questions. Here's Bootstrap. If I go into my index.html, notice that I have Bootstrap here. Using Bootstrap, and if I need, in order for me to use Bootstrap, I'm using jQuery anyway, right? So it's not going to hurt me necessarily at all to use our jQuery in our code. Now, one thing I noticed that I have this typings folder up here, and what I'm going to do is, for now, I'm not going to ignore this in my my GitHub. I could ignore my typing because this is just for development. I don't need this typings folder at all for production. So from a production perspective, this is useless, right? And TypeScript itself is really, from a development perspective, to help us get some really clean code. That's what it's for. So I don't really need this from a production perspective, so I can ignore it on if I put it up on the library. For now, though, for you guys, and here's something that you may not be able to do. Let's say, for example, you can't get NPM working, but you still want to try and do what I'm doing here. I'm going to put this up on GitHub so you can try it out. So I'm going to kind of go up here, and I'm going to just go up on GitHub and say added typing support for jQuery. That's really all I've done, right? And I haven't really added TypeScript, and click push. So that's going to push up my latest version of the code. So if you want to go up on GitHub, so again, I'll go up on GitHub for a second. So here's GitHub, and let's refresh, and you'll see that added typing support for jQuery is up there, and you have my typings folder in there, just in case. Oh, this is wrong. I got to change that README file. Hold on a second. I forgot. It's my README file, and this is for lesson 10. Lesson 10 for client-side scripting at Georgian College. The topic that we're talking about, of course, is jQuery. jQuery essentials. We're really talking about today. So that's kind of updated my README file. So I might as well go up and do another little push. So updated README file. And push that up to GitHub as well. So you have that up there as well. I'm doing this through the Visual Studio Code GitHub piece, so that way you have everything. Okay, nice and simple. So one more time, any questions? Please put your questions up here, and I'll be sure to try and answer them as fast as possible. All right, let's go continue a little bit more, and then we'll take a short break, for a bio break and stuff, and we'll come back. We'll try and take maybe a break every hour, and come back and continue doing this kind of stuff, so it doesn't bore you to tears. All right, so we talked about how to select elements by relationship. We also talked about how to use jQuery selectors to kind of target different elements on the page and to get back details. How do we use this in code? And this is something that we can do. Well, here's something we can do with jQuery. I'm just going to add that to my dictionary for a second. So let's say, for example, I target something. Well, jQuery is known for not just being able to target. That's one of the strengths, right? So a really quick way of targeting classes and IDs and everything. Notice I don't have to say document.getElementById, right, when I was doing this. So I'm not saying, in order for me to do what I did before, right, so if I go back to my app.js, I have to do something document.querySelectForAll. I don't have to do that. Or document.getElementById. That's a totally different thing too, right? These two kind of return the same thing. QuerySelectForAll is kind of the same thing as jQuery, right? But the strength of it is that it cuts all this stuff down, right, and makes all this into this little $ shortcut, right? Okay, cool. But when I get this, I want to apply some methods that are built into jQuery. And now here's where the strength really comes into play. right? So I can use a method on top of my, so target my selector and do a behavior, have a behavior work on my selector so that it produces something. Okay, let's see how this works. So here's some common ones. We kind of tried and did some of this already. We said val, get the value of a text box or other form control with val, right? Val value we can set. So both the val with open parentheses, with empty parentheses, and val with a value inside can get or set the value of some kind of object that's inside that I'm basically targeting. Same thing with text. Get the text of an element or set the text of an element. Okay, and there's other ones. Here's something we can also look for when we look at a form itself. I can look at the submit the selected form. So I get the form and then submit it. So instead of us pressing the button, the button for submit, we can submit the form after we validate it, as an example. Okay, and move the focus. There's some common jQuery methods that we can see all over the place, and this is how you implement them. So example would be this. Let's say I have a variable that I declare for gallon, right? Like, I don't know. And what I want to do is I want to get the value of this text box, gallons, how many gallons I got. I want to get it into this variable. Remember that what I'm doing here is actually creating a reference between the variable and the ID here. And what I'm doing here is, get element by ID and get the value of the element that's in here back, right? Now remember, this is what I'm doing. I can also set the value to nothing if I wanted to do it that way. And the same goes for some of these other examples here, right? So just letting you know, so the first piece is targeting, we target, and then the next piece is we do something to it. Okay, so value and text. Let's try different things like that and see if we can do something the same with JavaScript, if it's possible. All right, so I'm looking at this first element. So remember, I'm getting back an array of elements here, right? I'm looking at the first element, and if I want to get the value of the first element, I just have to type val. So let's see what I'm getting back now with our console log. So go back to here, and let's go back up to my page, which is not that one. That's Azure Websites. This one, and refresh. And we're going to get this uncaught type error. It says val is not a function. Why is val not a function, right? Well, because what I'm actually doing is a couple things. One is I'm getting the value back already of an h1 tag, right? If I want the value, right, val, notice how we go back to here for a second. The val of my target, my selector, right? And if I was going to try and figure this out, take a look. If I go dot val, here's the method, and I want to get the value back of, this is going to be a reference to all the values of my entire list. Okay, this is interesting. So let's see what we get back now when I refresh. All right, takes the nothing. I get nothing back. So I get 0 back, the value of this, right? Okay. And what if I was to cut this down to say, you know what? Give me my h1 tag, my main content, just my main content itself. So that's just like my, and if I go back to index.html, my main content is the main, that's the main tag that I'm getting back. And I want to get a reference to the main content. Okay, how do I do that? So go back to here. And let's see how that looks. So refresh. And I get nothing again. The value of my main content is nothing. I don't have a value that comes back. Why? Because look what it says here in the details, right? If I go back, it says the value from a text box or input or some kind of input element. Well, this isn't an input element. I can certainly try and use the value, right? I can put it in val. But val has no bearing on an array of elements that I'm getting back, right? How about text instead? So if I say dot text, right? and if I refresh, go back to this, and if I refresh this, oh look, here's the value that I'm getting, the text I'm getting back from each of the h1 tags, because it's returning an array of elements, right? So there's 1, 2 elements. Okay, cool. Well, if that's true, then shouldn't I be able to do something like this? Can I go, the first element's text? Can I do that, right? And if I save that and go back here and refresh, I get a type error again. Oh man, what's going on? How come I'm not getting that? Well, the way to really do this is in a couple of steps. One way is to say, okay, get a reference to this first element, right? Here's main content h1, and what I want to do is in here in my console log, get the text value, right? So text content or text, right, of this node. So if I go text content, right, of my main content h1 tag, this one, right, this is going to return the text content of my 0th element. So let's try this out. So refresh, and what's going on? How come? Because I'm saying my main content h1, and I'm getting the text content of this, but hold on, I don't understand. Oh wait, because I'm not targeting my h1 element again. Hold on, I missed that. Refresh here. Here we go. So this is welcome to lesson 10. So this is welcome, just the text of this. Okay, that's cool. All right, so what if I did this again? What if I went to this, content of this? Can I do that? And let's take this away, see what that is, save and refresh. Do I get an error again? I do. An error because it says text is not a function, right? Text is not a function of the 0, right? Even though in my content here, take a look, in my my PowerPoint, it says you can use text, right? Text to set an element, right? Well, if text sets an element, how come I can't do that? How come I can't set the element? Here's another way. If I want to target the first h1 element, and let's say, for example, I have in my h1 element, I have this one is my welcome. So I put an ID for this one particularly, and I say something like my welcome h1. So an ID of welcome. So welcome. And this one here is another. So ID, we'll call this another. Now I've got IDs for everything. I got ID for my main content, and I got ID for my h1 tags, and so on. And I want to get my text of this content. This is a different thing altogether. Let's go back to my code. So here's my main content h1, right? Let's make some other ones. So we'll leave these here, and we'll go back to this, right? So this is actually the element that I'm returning, my first h1 element, the 0th h1 element that I'm getting back in main content. This is I'm still leaving as traditional JavaScript. Let's just comment this out just for now, right? So we can see how we're getting the difference, right? And now what I want to do is I want to get another reference for jQuery, right? So here's jQuery, and type in var, and we're going to just type in the first one. So this is, notice what I called it, right? I said the welcome, right? The welcome h1. So I don't have to call anything. Let's call it welcome. So welcome is equal to, again, jQuery, and then I want to look at the selector that I want, right? Okay, so here's my selector. So I want to talk about welcome, right? Now I can't put it like this. I have to use it just like I do CSS. I got to put the pound hashtag there, and then so I want to get that. So here's my reference. This is a reference to what I'm returning from welcome. Okay, cool. And then if I do, console log, let's just pump out welcome and see what I get. Notice when I hover over this, what I'm getting, it says jQuery. Doesn't say h1 element like this one. This one actually returns an element. This one actually returns jQuery. Okay, cool. Let's see what I get back when I do this. So go back to page, refresh, and oh man, what's going on? How come I get this uncaught exception? Here's my h1 element I'm getting back, app.js, and then I get this uncaught type error, console.log is not a function. Oh man, I called it console.lof arg. Let's try this again. What happened? Refresh. Yay. So this is what I get back with my h1. I get this jQuery selector back, right? So this doesn't give me what I want. I mean, it gives me my welcome, my h1, my hashtag welcome. It also gives me my selector, and inside my context, if I look through down this whole length of context, it should also give me my inner HTML, right? That's down in here. If I want to see what this is, here's another one is what I want to look for. So where do I see that? So again, if I look through here, it tells me a bunch of different things, right? Here's my HTML selection and so on. I have my anchors, my applets, my URL, my active element, body, right, and so on. A bunch of different things here. And as I swim down into here, right, as an example, I can keep on trying to look for different things. Everything from all my events that I'm getting, it's an object. This isn't, just, the content of something, right? Here's my HTML collection that I get back, my scripts. It's pretty powerful. Look, all the stuff, the information that I get, but pretty useless right now. I really want not just a reference to the tag, but my text itself. Let's see if I can get that. Let's go back. So if I go, what about text? So this, I want to get my text back for this thing. Do I get an error again? Is that how? Is that what happens? First, right? This first one returns my main content, right? The element main content itself, which is this H1 welcome. Let's refresh again so you can see that, right? The second one returns the text that's inside the text node of the H1 element, right? So this first one, the H1 element. The second one, the text node. Notice that this, jQuery knows that this, because I'm doing a selector with a descendant, is different than this, a regular selector, right? So this is, I'm selecting an object. This, I'm selecting an object that's inside main content. So all H1s inside main content. Here, I'm selecting one, all everything that's tagged with a welcome, right? And I'm getting the text of that and putting it into this welcome object. Notice it says welcome is a string, right? Why? Because I've added this text into there, but I can't add text to here, right? Okay. So that's one thing I could do. The other thing is I can do is, if this is an HTML element that I'm getting back, if I want the inner HTML or the text content of this one, I could always put it in here. So I can say something like, text content. Okay? I can put that in there. So for the text content, if I were to do that, refresh, it's going to be the same, right? So text content of my main content H1, and now notice like I'm targeting my first H1 tag, right, as an example. Then my text content is equivalent to doing welcome text when I'm targeting that specific ID, right? Again, just ways, I'm just showing you ways of filtering and targeting with jQuery, so it's effective. Now, what if I put val? So if I put, does val exist? And I look what it says. Get the current value of the first element in the set of matched elements. Well, there isn't a value, right? Like we did last time. So welcome now should give me an error, right? Refresh. Get nothing. There is no value of this. How do I add a value? Well, remember that in my index.html, in my index.html, that's not, I'm getting that. I'm, I've got ID, but can I add in my index.html here, can add a value if I really wanted to into this first element. So back to my app.js. So I'm looking for the value of my welcome, right? And going back to index.html, welcome is this one, right? So what if I put a value in there? So if I say value, can I put a value in here? Is that possible? No. How about name? Can I put a name in there for my H1? No, because it wouldn't give me. I mean, I could, but typing in value is equal to something like, I don't know, 1. Just making this up. Value is equal to 1. Does that make any sense for an H1 element? Probably not, right? But what does it do for me when it comes to using jQuery? Let's go back and refresh. So go back to here and refresh and still get nothing. Right, so here's my welcome, and that's what it's returning the second one. Even though I'm getting a value, I'm not getting the 1 back, right? Now remember, I can look at different things with jQuery. If I want to look at the attribute, right? Here's my attribute, right? So I can also look at an attribute that's part of of that particular tag as well, right? So here's my attribute, and it says get the value of an attribute for the first element in the set of matched elements, right? The value of the attribute. So if I say attribute and then the attribute name, so say for example the attribute name is value. I want to get the value of my value back, right? So this is what I'm getting back, and I'm storing it in welcome. Let's see if it gives me an error. So and refresh, and I get 1, right? Because inside of my index.html, I have an attribute. Remember the things that are inside the the tag in here. These are called attributes. So here's my ID, and here's my value, right? Well, I'm targeting value, and I want to get a value. I've set it to 1 for whatever reason, and I want to get this value back, right? So now what I can do is when I go back to my app.js, I can say, get my attribute, I'm targeting this value of the attribute value. What if I target the attribute ID, right? So I want to get the attribute ID, which is also an attribute of my index.html. So here's my index.html. Inside my h1 tag, I have an ID attribute and a value attribute. I should be able to get back welcome, yeah? Let's see if that works. So fresh, welcome. So I get welcome back as an attribute. So I can really target a lot of stuff with jQuery. That would be very hard to do, by the way. Much harder to do with JavaScript. It would be a couple lines. Okay, so let's go back. So again, some simple ways. So I'm saying, hey, target the welcome, the ID that has welcome, and the tag that includes welcome as well, the welcome ID. So get element by ID welcome, right? And then take a look at the first attribute of the first element that returned. Get this ID of it, and return it back and store it inside my welcome variable, and then print it out. All right, that's what's happening here. All right, let's go back. So let's get rid of this for a second and go back to what I did before. So if I go text, I had in before, that kind of returns the text, and text is a method. It's one of the most common methods we have on here. And I just used another one, attribute, ATTR, that gives me the attributes that are built into the function as well. And we're taking baby steps here, but the reason why I'm doing this is so that way you understand, you get some practice on using jQuery, and it gives you a chance to catch up with what I'm doing. Okay. So this is cool. So again, we can use some different options depending if they make sense. And again, notice that this is text box and input. There has to be a value attribute in there, and it has to make sense. It can't just be, an element that I'm entering in. This is great for forms. So if I have a form, so let's say here we have my main, and underneath my main, I add a form element. So just put a form in there. Form, and inside my form, I'm going to have a couple things. I'm going to have a div tag with a class of form group, right? Here's my form group. And I'm going to have a label, right? And I'll put the 4 in there. And also some kind of, which is my label and my class of, sorry, the class for the label is going to be, if I'm not sure, form control, form-control, I think that's what it is from Bootstrap. This is all Bootstrap classes, right? And then if I have my input, right, and my type is text, and my form control, form class is equal to also form control, is equal to form-control. Here we go, so I'm typing this thing here. So here's my input, right? So, and let's put a name. So my name for my input is, I don't know, username. And this one, my 4 is for username, right? So that's fine. And then maybe we'll make it so that we have a placeholder here as well, placeholder. And placeholder is, enter username. Put in username without username. Cool. And inside my label, I want to put in username up here. So username. And let's see how this thing works out if I've got this correct, right? So, and I may have missed something, but that's okay. Let's see what I get when I go back to here and refresh. So I get this massive username thing with some stuff. I want to definitely put this inside my some kind of class to contain this thing. Notice that my main has a class of container around it, and I probably want to do the same thing for my my form control. There's 2 different sections here. One is for my main content, let's say, and another one is for my form. And let's say we'll just call this. We'll give this an ID just for whatever it is, ID of form 1. So the first form we're going to be using, and let's kind of put this inside another div tag with a class of container. Div tag class container. And we'll cut this and put it in there. Go. And we'll format our code a little bit to make it look a little nicer. And let's see what we get now. When we go back to here, refresh, you can see that that's contained. Still quite big, right? And if I want to make it so that the width of this element is like 50%, I could target this thing with CSS. Yeah, I could, but I could also use jQuery or JavaScript to do the same thing. just for this example, so I want to target my form 1, and I want to give it a style, right? I want to change the style of my form 1 so that when it gets rendered to the screen, it only has a width of 50%. All right, so we'll do the JavaScript way and we'll do the jQuery way, and then we'll take a short break. All right, so let's go back here. So back to here, and here's my app.js and some stuff that's going on over here for my welcome. And let's go back and deal with the form element now. So I'm going to make a reference to it. So say var form1, let's just call it the same as it is equal to the old way, the JavaScript, let's say JavaScript, is equal to document.getElementById, and then in brackets form1. So we got an element, we got a reference to the element itself. And what I want to do is I want to say form1 js.style and I'll say width, style that width. That's how we do style, actual style with JavaScript. That's equal to, as an example, 50%. We normally would do CSS, right? So the width of this object is 50%, right? Okay, cool. Save that, and let's go back to here and refresh. Let's see what I get. So 50% of the screen. See that the width of my form now is a little bit smaller. I don't have in here. I don't have a button to submit the form. So let's add a button in the form itself. So I'll go back to my index.html, and inside my form itself, I'll put in I love when this happens. I'll put in a button. All right, so we'll put in a button, and the button itself that I put in I'll give it now again, it could be a button with an ID of submit button. Ignore my phone call. Who cares? Here's my ID of submit button, and we'll just call this thing submit. Now this is not a classic submit, right? So submit. There we go. And now this is a form control. So button, and I got a class that's also a form control, form-control, right? And this is a type of button, but it's also even if I do form control, there's actually button, and then in buttons, I think button default will be the way we do it in JavaScript or in Bootstrap. Let's take a look and see what we get back. Refresh. So I get this big submit button. It's massive, and it takes the whole form, because why? The submit button, by the way, doesn't do anything. But my submit button is the same size as my form because I've made it a form control, right? But if I make it a button, so button, and then button dash default, go back to here and refresh. Right, there's my little button, my submit button. It's just styling. All that Bootstrap does is styles our form. It looks like a regular button, right? And it has the submit functionality. It has that blue outline that you get from jQuery and so on. And if I wanted to make, or Bootstrap, and if I wanted to make this primary, to make it a kind of a blue button. Let's refresh now. Get a blue button going on. Or if I want to make it alert. Alert. I don't know if that's the same one. Nope. Danger. Button danger. That's it. Danger, refresh, red, right? And so you can change the colors of the buttons by just changing the class, right? So we'll put this back to primary, like blue button, better, refresh. But notice that we styled this form, the width of the form, with JavaScript, right? And let's go back to my JavaScript. So I don't want to use JavaScript. I got in 2 lines here. I want to use jQuery. How do I do that? How do I change the form or the CSS style of my form? So we'll just kind of comment this out for a second. So we'll put this in deep freeze just for 1 sec, and we'll do the same thing with jQuery. So form1, we'll call it JQ just for jQuery, and then we want to target that element. So we'll say $1, but it's going to be hashtag, because that's how we normally do it. Form1. We want to do a style. Oh man, hey, style can't work. That can't work. How about CSS? Okay, that makes sense. So CSS, it says the property name of the CSS, and inside my property name, I want to say width, right? And inside here, I want to put in 50%. So that's what I want to kind of say. So form1 CSS equal to 50%. Right. So I want to kind of do this all at once, all in one line. In fact, I don't even need this variable. But what it looks like. Let's see what that does. So we'll go back here and refresh. Does it do it? No, right? It doesn't kind of gives me my stuff. Let's print out what this thing does. Let's just comment these things out for a second. I like the idea behind it, but I mean, my code ending kind of told me what to do, but width. And so I targeted the width, but did I do this right? How do I know? Well, let's see what I get back when I do my console log. So console and troubleshooting, right? Console log. We're trying to learn jQuery here. Okay, and refresh, and what I get back is undefined, right? Because there is no CSS. What about if I did this? So width. So I want to get the CSS width of the selector. Okay. What about, instead of CSS, is there some kind of set? Offset. Okay. CSS by itself? No. If I say class, I can do class, add class, remove class, that kind of stuff I can do, no problem. And CSS actually has 3 overloads. Get the value of style properties for the first element. That's what it does. That's one of the things I can do with it, right? What other things can I do with CSS, right? If I were just using CSS, just getting the value, right? But can I set the value somehow? So go back. Let's see. What if we look it up? If you didn't have the PowerPoint, where I can go into jQuery itself to look it up. Well, let's say I want to set CSS jQuery. Hey, look, it's even up there. So jQuery CSS method on W3 schools. Very, very documented. So here's my property name, and then my background color. I'm targeting that background color. Hey, and there's the value, right? So I want to target it. So with a comma, I can target the value. That's pretty simple. So CSS width, and then here's the value, right? And the value is going to be 50%. Doing it all at once. Save, and then go back to my my files here. Oh, it's the wrong one. And refresh, right? Oh, hey, look, it's the same thing. And here's what I get back. So did I need this variable? This variable here that I'm getting back? Actually, the answer is no. I'm actually doing something just with this line alone. So if I was to get rid of this variable, here's where it becomes more lightweight in some ways than JavaScript. And let's just get rid of this altogether because we don't need that anymore, right? And if I was to do that and refresh, it still works. Right? So I can actually apply something. I can do something with jQuery without a variable name like we did up here, right? I can change it. I can get it or set it. If I want to get the text, that's good. I can assign it to a variable name. If I want to set the text, though, why would I do this? I don't need to do that. Like, for example, let's say I want to set the text, right? The text of my my form, right? So notice I have a username, and I want to change my attribute, my placeholder attribute of this object right here, right? So go back to this again. This is just DOM manipulation, right? So if I go back to here and if I go to index.html, notice that I have my attribute placeholder is username. I want to change my placeholder attribute, so the attribute that's inside my input, right, which is contained in my form group, right, which is contained inside of a form1 element. Here's my form1 element, right? So how do I target this thing? I want to say target, here's my selector, form1 input dot attribute, attr, placeholder, right? Placeholder, that's the attribute. That's what I want to target, right? So I can get it back or I can set it somehow. How do I do that? Well, let's figure that out. So go back to here and I want to do some little jQuery, right? So I want to do one of these. I'll do it down here. So jQuery, and I'm going to target the form1. So form1. Inside there, I've got an input, right? So the first input, or all inputs that have the first input, the form1, I want to get the attribute of the input that is placeholder. And I want to set the value, just like we did our CSS, I want to set the value of the placeholder to enter your name, your username. How about your username? That's a little bit different than what we have there, right? And there's no variable attached to this thing whatsoever. I'm just taking the placeholder, get the placeholder, the attribute of the placeholder inside this input element, and then change it to enter your username. Let's see if that works. Back, fresh. So you can see that the power that we have with jQuery as we start getting into more complex things. Here's something that I want to talk about before we take a short break. This is something called chaining, right? We have almost like this is a little method. And then what we're doing is we're chaining something else behind it. So here's my first, the selector, and we're using chaining with the dot accessor method to chain a bunch of things behind it, right? So that's one thing we can do. We can do multiple chains of commands, one after the other here. Now we've only done 2. We're kind of getting to a point where we can do more of this chaining to affect the stuff that's going on. And by the way, we're doing this here just randomly. We could have a function that we call, and after the function is called, this stuff happens, changing the width and so on. An example of this would be if I hover over, if I do an event and I hover over my form, it changes shape. Like let's say, for example, I want to transition my form from 50% width to something like 60% width to make it bigger. So, as I transition over it, I can do this with CSS too, but I can use JavaScript or jQuery to do the same thing. All right, before we stop, any questions that I have from anyone else online? I want to kind of go back to concept board before we do any kind of, we'll take a short break. All right, so I don't see anybody having any questions. Let's take a short break, around 10 minutes. So we'll come back around 10:40, let's say, approximately. And we'll continue on with jQuery and go through the PowerPoint presentation and give you more examples of how we can use this thing. Okay? So we'll take a short break.